Okay, picture this. You get a shipment of raw materials, and you need to know they're good. Or maybe you just take your daily supplements and you just expect them to be, consistent. Every pill the same. What goes on behind the scenes to make that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really highlights the importance of materials management, especially in industries like pharmaceuticals and dietary supplements, where quality and consistency are absolutely paramount.
Right. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the whole world of materials management. How do these companies ensure that everything from the raw materials to the packaging to the final product is top-notch, all while operating within the framework of good manufacturing practices, those GMPs?
Yeah, GMPs are the bedrock here, and we're going to take a deep dive into how those principles are put into action. We've got a ton of great sources to pull from, too. Things like the FDA's 21 CFR Parts 110, 111, and 211 industry guides on GMP for pharmaceutical facilities, and even some really insightful discussions on laboratory best practices and, that all-important documentation.
And we'll unpack it all for you. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a much clearer understanding of the rigorous processes that go into making sure the products you use are safe, effective, and meet the highest quality standards.
Exactly. We're going to be talking about everything from choosing the right suppliers to controlling your inventory to the ins and outs of sampling and testing procedures and how manufacturers set those critical acceptance criteria. Basically, all the pieces that fit together to create that really robust quality system.
So lots to uncover. Sounds like a good place to start would be right at the beginning with how companies choose their suppliers. Because, if you're starting with subpar ingredients, you can't expect a high-quality final product.
Right, absolutely. You nailed it. It all starts with the suppliers.
Mm.
Think of it like this. You wouldn't try to bake a cake with spoiled milk and expect it to turn out delicious, would you?
No way. Unless you're going for some kind of, experimental sourdough situation.
Right, exactly. So, in the pharmaceutical and supplement world, it's all about starting with the best possible ingredients. And that means carefully vetting and qualifying your suppliers.
So what kind of things are they looking at when they qualify a supplier?
Well, this guide, Good Design Practices for GMP Pharmaceutical Facilities, actually points out a really interesting challenge for contract manufacturers. The companies that produce products for other companies, they have to meet not only the regular regulatory requirements, but also the often very specific and sometimes, diverse audit demands of each of their clients.
Oh, wow. So they have to be extra diligent in making sure their suppliers are up to snuff.
Exactly. They're juggling a lot.
Right?
And it really highlights why that supplier qualification process is so critical. It's not just about checking off boxes. It's about making sure that your suppliers are meeting all the necessary standards and that you have the documentation to prove it.
So it's not as simple as just finding the cheapest supplier.
Right. Definitely not. Price is definitely a factor, but it can't be the only one. You need to know that your suppliers are reliable, that they're committed to quality, and that they can meet your specific requirements.
And I'm guessing that's where regulations like 21 CFR Part 111 come in.
You got it. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Especially Section 111.70. It basically lays out the ground rules for what manufacturers need to do to make sure their components are up to par. And we're not just talking about the active ingredients here. This covers everything from raw materials to packaging materials to even the labels.
Wow. So every single component has to meet certain standards.
Yep, that's right. And those standards are pretty comprehensive, too. We're talking about the identity of the material, making sure it is what it says it is. Its purity, its strength or potency, its composition, and even the acceptable limits for any contaminants.
So they're really looking at every aspect of the material.
Exactly. They have to. It's all about ensuring the quality and safety of the final product. And the regulations don't stop there. They also require manufacturers to have detailed documentation that proves that meeting these component specifications will actually result in a finished product that meets all of its intended quality attributes.
So they can't just take the supplier's word for it. They need to have their own evidence.
Exactly, right. It's about building a chain of evidence, a paper trail that demonstrates the quality of the final product all the way back to the source materials.
And this attention to detail extends to everything in the manufacturing environment, even down to the cleaning agents. Right?
Absolutely. Even the things you might not think about at first glance. So 21 CFR Part 110, specifically Section 110.35B1, talks about the need to have guarantees or certifications from your suppliers for any cleaning and sanitizing agents that you're using.
To make sure those cleaning products don't accidentally contaminate the products themselves.
Exactly. You don't want to go through all that trouble to make sure your raw materials are top-notch, only to have them get contaminated by a subpar cleaning agent.
Right. Makes sense. So you've got your qualified suppliers,
Yep.
you're getting high-quality ingredients. Now those materials arrive at the manufacturing facility. What happens next? How do they keep everything organized and make sure the right materials are being used at the right time?
That's where inventory control comes in. And it's a lot more than just counting what's on the shelves. It's about managing the entire flow of materials through the facility in a really systematic and controlled way.
So kind of like air traffic control, but for ingredients.
Exactly. You've got to make sure everything's moving smoothly and that there are no collisions along the way.
No mix-ups.
Right, no mix-ups. And 21 CFR Part 111 actually lays out some very specific requirements for this. So for example, Section 111.80 talks about the need to store all received products under conditions that protect them from contamination and deterioration.
So that's things like temperature control, test control, making sure everything's properly sealed.
Exactly. And that same section also stresses the importance of preventing mix-ups, which can be a huge issue. Imagine accidentally using the wrong ingredient in a medication. That could have some pretty serious consequences.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
So how do they prevent those mix-ups?
Well, Section 111.8D2 requires each unique lot within a shipment to have a unique identification number. It's like a tracking code for that specific batch of material.
Oh, that's smart, so they can trace it all the way back to the source if they need to.
Right, and that's a really important part of GMP. It's all about traceability, being able to track every material from the moment it enters the facility to the moment it leaves as part of a finished product.
Makes sense. And then there's that whole concept of FIFO.
Right? Yeah, first in, first out. That's a key principle in inventory management, especially when you're dealing with materials that have a shelf life.
So the oldest stock gets used first.
Exactly. That helps to prevent materials from expiring or degrading while they're in storage. And it's actually codified in the regulations. 21 CFR Section 211.86 talks about the need to rotate stock so that the oldest approved stock is used first.
So it's not just a good practice, it's actually a requirement.
Right, and it makes a lot of sense. You want to make sure you're using the freshest ingredients possible to ensure the highest quality product.
Okay, so we've got a qualified materials.
Yeah.
They're properly identified and stored. We're using the oldest stock first. What's the next step in making sure everything meets those quality standards?
That brings us to the really crucial area of sampling procedures.
Oh, yeah. Testing the materials to make sure they're what they're supposed to be.
Exactly. And sampling is all about making sure you're getting a representative sample of the material you're testing, because it's usually not feasible to test every single container or package of every material that comes in. You need a way to select a sample that will give you an accurate picture of the overall quality of the batch.
Makes sense. So what are some of the key things to consider when developing those sampling procedures?
Well, 21 CFR Part 211 has a lot to say about that, especially Section 211.10A. It mandates that manufacturers have written procedures for sampling and testing both in-process materials and finished drug products. And the goal here is to ensure batch uniformity and integrity, basically making sure that every unit in a batch is consistent and meets the required specifications.
And that's where the lab comes in, right?
Absolutely. The lab plays a critical role in analyzing those samples and making sure they meet the required standards.
But they can't just use any old test method, right?
Nope, not at all. The EAS Consulting Group video transcript we looked at really emphasized the importance of using scientifically valid test methods. Whether those methods are developed in-house or taken from recognized compendia like the USP United States Pharmacopoeia, they need to be robust and reliable.
So it's not just about following a recipe. It's about understanding the science behind the test.
Exactly, and every step of those test methods needs to be carefully documented in a standard operating procedure or SOP. That way everyone's doing it the same way every time, and there's a clear record of what was done.
And what about the equipment they use to do the testing? Does that have to meet certain standards too?
Oh, absolutely. The EAS Consulting Group video transcript touched on that as well. And it's also spelled out in 21 CFR Part 111 Subpart D, specifically Section 111.27A. It basically says that any equipment used for testing has to be of appropriate design, construction, and workmanship to ensure that it's going to perform its intended function reliably.
So it's got to be the right tool for the job.
Yeah, and not only that, it has to go through a process called qualification to make sure it's actually up to the task.
So what does that qualification process involve?
Well, it usually involves 4 stages: design qualification, installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification.
So DQ, IQ, OQ, PQ.
Yeah, all those acronyms. Basically what they're doing is making sure that the equipment is suitable for its intended purpose, that it's been installed correctly, that it operates as intended, and that it can consistently produce accurate results under actual working conditions.
So they're really putting that equipment through its paces.
They have to. You can't cut corners when it comes to the quality of your testing equipment, because if your equipment isn't reliable, your results won't be either. And then on top of that, there's calibration.
Right, making sure the equipment is giving accurate readings.
Exactly. And that's another regulatory
Okay.
requirement. Section 111.27C says that equipment needs to be calibrated before its first use and then at regular intervals after that to ensure it stays accurate.
So they're constantly checking and rechecking to make sure everything's working properly.
Yep. It's all about maintaining that high level of quality control.
Okay, so they've taken representative samples, they've tested them using qualified and calibrated equipment, and they've followed those detailed standard procedures. How do they actually decide if a material passes or fails the test?
That's where acceptance criteria come into play. Those are the predefined standards that a material or product has to meet in order to be considered acceptable for use.
So it's not just a matter of opinion. There are specific measurable values that have to be met.
Exactly. And those acceptance criteria have to be documented too. 21 CFR section 211.84D says that components, drug product containers, and closures all have to meet written specifications for identity, strength, quality, purity, and they have to undergo the necessary tests to prove it.
And what happens if a batch of material doesn't meet those criteria?
Well, then it gets rejected.
Yeah.
That's pretty clear in section 211.84E.
Mhm.
If it doesn't meet the specs, it can't be used.
So the lab is playing a really important role here, not just in doing the test, but also in helping to establish those acceptance criteria in the first place.
Right? Absolutely. They're the ones who understand the analytical methods and what kind of results to expect, so they're really key in setting those standards.
And Kim Honeba's material on analytical testing for GMP labs really highlighted that too. The lab's role in developing and performing these tests using validated methods, and for drug products in particular, that dissolution method you mentioned earlier is often a critical part of the acceptance criteria.
Right? Yeah, exactly. The dissolution test basically measures how quickly and completely a drug dissolves in the body, which is really important for its effectiveness. So that test is often a key factor in determining whether a drug product meets its specifications.
So it's really this whole interconnected system, right? From carefully vetting your suppliers, to controlling your inventory, to conducting thorough sampling and testing, to having those clearly defined acceptance criteria. It all works together to prevent quality problems from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. It's all about building quality into every stage of the process.
And 21 CFR Part 111 really drives that point home too.
Yeah.
With things like the requirement to quarantine any rejected materials, that's Section 111.17 serial.
Yeah, that's a really important safeguard. You don't want those rejected materials accidentally ending up back in the production stream.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then there's also the need to protect materials from contamination during any kind of processing or handling steps.
Right, definitely. That's covered in section 111.80. Basically, anytime you're doing something to a material, whether it's cutting it, sorting it, blending it, you have to make sure you're doing it in a way that prevents contamination.
So they're thinking about quality every step of the way.
Exactly. And they have to document every step, too.
Oh, right. Documentation is key in GMP.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everything has to be documented.
Yeah.
Every action, every test, every decision. Because if it's not documented, it's like it never happened.
That's what they say in the EAS Consulting Group video transcript. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. And the CHIO's Lunch and Learn video transcript on good documentation practices really emphasized that too.
Yeah, that one was full of great tips on how to keep good records, and it stressed how important those records are for demonstrating compliance with GMP.
So what kind of things are they documenting?
Well, pretty much everything. The date, the time, the person performing the task, a description of what was done, the results of any tests, any deviations from standard procedures, and the reason for the deviation. It's a lot of information.
But it's all important, right?
Yeah.
Because it allows them to trace back any issues that arise and make sure they're corrected.
Exactly. And it also provides evidence that they're following GMPs, which is critical for regulatory inspections.
And of course, standard operating procedures or SOPs are a big part of that documentation too, right?
Definitely. SOPs are like the written instructions for how to perform a task in a GMP-compliant way. They help to ensure consistency and prevent errors.
So they're kind of like the recipe books for GMP.
Exactly. They lay out every step in detail, so anyone can follow them and get the same results.
Okay, so we've talked about what happens when materials meet the acceptance criteria.
Yeah.
But what happens if they don't? Or what if a product is returned by a customer? How do they handle those situations?
Well, for rejected materials, we already touched on that a bit. They have to be quarantined, and then a decision is made about what to do with them, whether they can be reprocessed or if they need to be destroyed.
And that's all spelled out in Section 111.170, right?
Yep. And then for return products, there are specific procedures in place too. Section 111.510 talks about return drug products, and Section 111.515 covers dietary supplements.
So they have to be quarantined, and then they undergo a material review to figure out what to do with them.
Right, and that review is done by qualified quality control personnel. They'll look at the reason for the return, the condition of the product, and any other relevant information to make a decision about whether the product can be salvaged or if it needs to be destroyed.
And 21 CFR Section 211.204 is really strict about that for drug products. If there's any doubt about the safety, identity, strength, quality, or purity of the product, it has to be destroyed unless testing can prove otherwise.
Yep, they're not taking any chances when it comes to patient safety.
Makes sense. So it's
Yeah.
really amazing when you think about it, how much thought and effort goes into managing every single material throughout this whole process. From the moment it arrives at the facility to the moment it leaves as part of a finished product.
It's really impressive, and it all comes down to that fundamental commitment to ensuring the quality and safety of the final product.
So just to recap, we've really gone deep into the world of materials management under GMP today. And we've seen how all the pieces fit together. The supplier qualification, the inventory, control the sampling and testing procedures, the acceptance criteria. It's a really comprehensive system designed to ensure that only the highest quality materials end up in the products consumers use.
And when you consider the number of checks and balances involved in getting a single raw material approved for use,
Yeah.
it really speaks to the level of rigor that goes into this process.
It's definitely eye-opening, and it makes me think about how all of this will continue to evolve in the future, especially as supply chains become increasingly globalized. How do you see the challenges of materials management and supplier qualification changing in the years to come?
That's a great question, and it's something the industry is definitely grappling with. As supply chains become more complex and geographically dispersed, maintaining that same level of quality control is going to require even more vigilance and innovation. I think we'll see even more emphasis on supplier auditing, advanced testing techniques, and collaboration between regulatory bodies to ensure that those high standards are maintained no matter where the materials are coming from. It's definitely an area to keep a close eye on.
It sounds like it.
Uh,
And it makes you appreciate all the more the effort that goes into ensuring that the products we use every day are safe, effective, and meet those high-quality standards.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the dedication of the people working in these industries to provide consumers with the best possible products.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights and expertise.
It's been my pleasure. Always happy to talk about GMP.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with more insights from the world of pharmaceuticals and beyond.
See you next time.